Sanctimony denotes the quality of being sanctimonious, which manifests as a showy, affected, or hypocritical display of piety, righteousness, or moral superiority. This quality involves pretended or self-righteous holiness rather than genuine virtue. It carries implications of smugness and moral grandstanding, wherein individuals or groups adopt a holier-than-thou stance while disregarding their own flaws. Sanctimony functions critically and pejoratively in descriptions of behavior that prioritizes appearance over substance. The term derives from Latin sanctimonia, meaning holiness or sanctity, rooted in sanctus, or holy. Over time, the English usage acquired a negative connotation centered on hypocrisy. Related forms include the adjective sanctimonious, which describes the affected display itself, and the adverb sanctimoniously, which qualifies actions performed in such a manner. These linguistic elements underscore the performative nature of the concept across contexts of ideological, cultural, and institutional interaction. This essay examines the interconnections among sanctimony, subversion, and sabotage as a cohesive triad. It analyzes the triad synergy in nonviolent and soft power strategies. Subsequent sections address variations in conscious and unconscious behavior, associated psychological parameters, relevant social dynamics and human behaviors, and practical approaches to identification and addressing. The analysis proceeds through precise examination of each component and its relations to produce a unified account of the triad's operation. The interconnection of subversion, sabotage, and sanctimony. Subversion, sabotage, and sanctimony form an interconnected triad that operates powerfully in ideological, cultural, and institutional conflicts. Sanctimony supplies the cover, justification, and recruitment mechanism by framing actions as virtuous defenses of justice, equity, or higher goods. This moral camouflage disarms potential critics and converts opposition into evidence of the critic's own moral deficiency. Subversion functions as the long-term undermining of foundations, norms, trust, institutions, and traditions through internal infiltration and gradual replacement of core values with inverted alternatives. Sabotage delivers active disruption or damage, ranging from subtle bureaucratic inefficiencies to overt measures such as boycotts, leaks, or cancellations. The synergy arises because sanctimony provides moral fuel and emotional justification while subversion weakens structural resistance and sabotage executes targeted blows. The combination enables change or collapse with the target's own participants, often endorsing the process as righteous. Sanctimony exploits guilt, status-seeking, and social conformity to secure compliance. The triad maintains low risk and high reward by leveraging the target's rules against itself in asymmetric settings. Self-perpetuation occurs as failure reinforces demands for intensified efforts under heightened moral claims. Analyses of the triad appear in discussions of cultural shifts, institutional decline, and long marches through institutions. The pattern surfaces in critiques of progressive movements that employ sanctimonious virtue signaling to advance subversion of merit-based systems and sabotage of opponents. Comparable patterns receive identification in populist or traditionalist contexts where sanctimonious patriotism supports parallel undermining and disruption. The triad constitutes a recurrent human power tactic rather than an ideology-specific phenomenon. It thrives wherever moral signaling incentives align with opportunities for internal erosion and active interference. Variations in conscious and unconscious behavior. The triad exhibits distinct variations according to levels of awareness and intent. Conscious variations involve deliberate, strategic deployment by individuals or groups who orchestrate sanctimony as camouflage, subversion as planned erosion, and sabotage as calculated strikes. These appear in ideological and political activism, hybrid warfare, and institutional power plays. Operators frame infiltration and disruption as moral necessities, using sanctimonious rhetoric to recruit and legitimize efforts. Interpersonal and narcissistic manipulation likewise deploys the triad consciously to erode confidence and create dependency. Revolutionary or insurgent tactics layer moral framing onto established sabotage methods to sustain participation. Unconscious variations emerge as habitual, emergent, or self-deceptive patterns driven by biases, socialization, and group dynamics. Cultural or ideological osmosis leads individuals to adopt sanctimonious frames that produce self-subversion and collective participation in norm erosion without explicit intent. Moral grandstanding and virtue spirals generate status through public signaling that escalates conflict and undermines discourse norms. Psychological self-sabotage receives rationalization through moral superiority, while groupthink and mimetic spread produce collective behaviors that subvert cohesion and sabotage productivity. No central planner directs these processes. Social incentives sustain them. A pipeline connects the variations when conscious campaigns establish conditions that render the triad habitual among targets. Conscious origins plant seeds that yield unconscious adoption, transforming participants into unwitting agents. Scale ranges from individual interpersonal drama to collective movements. Intensity varies between performative overt signaling and insidious subtle shifts. Domains separate into politics and media, where conscious forms predominate, and psychology and relationships, where unconscious patterns surface more readily. Offensive and defensive orientations further differentiate applications across contexts. Psychological parameters pertaining to the triad. Moral grandstanding constitutes the central psychological parameter corresponding to sanctimony. It involves the use of moral or political statements primarily for self-promotion and social status seeking instead of constructive dialogue. Recognition desire drives the expression of grandstanding, with two motivational pathways. Prestige-seeking aims to appear admirable and elevated, while dominance-seeking seeks to outrank or silence others through asserted moral superiority. These pathways correlate with narcissistic traits, including extroversion for prestige and antagonism for dominance. Outcomes include heightened ideological extremism, affective polarization, and increased daily moral and political conflict. Moral foundations theory supplies additional parameters through its account of innate moral intuitions. 6 foundations shape rapid intuitive judgments: care, fairness, loyalty, authority, sanctity, and liberty. Sanctity and degradation align directly with sanctimonious purity intuitions, while authority and subversion relate to challenges against hierarchies and norms. Intuitive primacy ensures that moral judgments occur at a gut level before rationalization, fostering self-righteousness wherein actors mistake personal intuitions for objective truth. Differing foundation priorities produce blind spots that enable sanctimonious rhetoric to subvert shared norms and facilitate institutional sabotage. Further parameters include dark triad traits of Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy, which correlate with conscious manipulative deployment of the triad. Ideology functions as rationalization that converts self-interest into moral justification. Social comparison theory and status-seeking amplify grandstanding through upward and downward evaluations that escalate purity spirals. An addiction to self-righteous indignation provides neuropsychological reinforcement via dopamine rewards from outrage. These elements create the pipeline from conscious strategy to unconscious habituation, rendering the triad predictable under conditions of status incentives and group pressures. Social dynamics and human behaviors linked to the triad. Purity spirals and moral outbidding represent core social dynamics. Groups concentrate on a single moral value without upper limits, rewarding escalating extremism and punishing moderation. Sanctimony drives the process by elevating status through intensified signaling, which subverts original group purposes and sabotages internal cohesion through infighting and exclusion. Polarized public discourse and outrage cycles emerge when moral grandstanding converts debate into status competitions. Participants pile on in shaming, exaggerate charges, and amplify emotions to gain prestige or dominance. Social media mechanisms accelerate these cycles, producing outrage exhaustion, cynicism toward moral language, and deepened affective polarization. Institutional and cultural capture occurs through sanctimonious framing of norm infiltration as moral progress. Subversion redefines foundational values such as merit into equity baselines, while sabotage appears as selective enforcement, bureaucratic obstruction, or deplatforming. Groupthink, othering, and preference falsification sustain the dynamic by enforcing in-group loyalty through sanctimonious signaling. Dissenters receive labeling as immoral, which subverts open inquiry and sabotages collective problem-solving. These dynamics flourish in environments of high social media engagement, weakened norms against grandstanding, and strong incentives for moral signaling. Human behaviors associated with the triad center on status-seeking through moral talk. Prestige-seeking and dominance-seeking pathways manifest in public displays calibrated for admiration or control. Hypocrisy and self-deception allow rationalization of personal inconsistencies while maintaining sanctimonious postures. Free riding enables cheap status gains through performative outrage without substantive contribution, eroding trust and cooperation. Self-sabotage proceeds under moral cover when individuals or groups undermine their long-term interests in the name of virtue. These behaviors operate at individual and collective scales, converting psychological parameters into observable social patterns. Identification and addressing of the triad. Identification of the triad requires attention to synergistic patterns rather than isolated elements. Sanctimony reveals itself through moral claims motivated by recognition desire over evidence or outcomes. Indicators include uneven application of standards, piling on of unrelated issues, and outrage disproportionate to constructive action. Subversion appears in gradual erosion of norms and values, often through redefinition of concepts that weakens institutions over time. Sabotage manifests as framed disruptions that harm function while claiming ethical necessity. Combined markers encompass rising internal conflict alongside declining trust and productivity, loyalty tests superseding competence, and cycles wherein opposition reinforces sanctimonious claims. Addressing the triad proceeds at multiple levels through targeted practices. At the personal level, self-audit distinguishes efforts to do good from efforts to appear good. Satisfaction of status needs occurs privately through reflection rather than public display. Humility develops through steelmaning opposing views, emphasis on evidence and trade-offs, and acceptance of moral complexity. Reduction of amplifiers involves limiting exposure to outrage-driven media and seeking viewpoint diversity. These steps disrupt unconscious habits and restore alignment between stated morals and actual conduct. At interpersonal and group levels, neutral identification of the dynamic refocuses attention on shared goals without reciprocal grandstanding. Norms shift to reward substance, evidence, and acknowledgement of trade-offs over signaling. Public condemnation of excesses within one's own circles prevents escalation and maintains credibility. Institutional and societal addressing restores merit, transparency, and accountability by prioritizing competence and auditing policies for subversive effects. Promotion of viewpoint diversity in education and media counters capture. Documentation of outcome patterns supports construction of parallel healthy structures where necessary. The approach emphasizes genuine moral dialogue grounded in mutual understanding of differing intuitions rather than status competition. Collective progress arises when individuals model restrained conduct and institutions enforce substantive norms. Conclusion: the enduring dynamics of the triad and avenues for mitigation. The triad of subversion, sabotage, and sanctimony constitutes a coherent mechanism through which moral posturing facilitates the internal erosion and active disruption of institutions, norms, and social structures. Sanctimony operates as the justifying veneer of moral superiority that masks and legitimizes the deeper processes of subversion, which gradually undermines foundational values and trust, and sabotage, which executes targeted interference framed as ethical necessity. This interplay enables asymmetric influence with minimal direct confrontation, exploiting status-seeking incentives and intuitive moral frameworks to achieve outcomes that participants often perceive as righteous progress. The triad's effectiveness stems from its capacity to align conscious strategic deployment with unconscious habitual adoption, creating self-reinforcing cycles across ideological, cultural, and interpersonal domains. Psychological parameters such as moral grandstanding, with its prestige and dominance-seeking pathways, provide the individual motivational substrate, while differing moral intuitions and status-driven rationalizations sustain the dynamic at collective levels. Social dynamics including purity spirals, outrage cycles, and institutional capture translate these parameters into observable patterns of polarization, norm erosion, and declining cooperation. Human behaviors centered on performative signaling, hypocrisy rationalization, and free riding further embed the triad within everyday interactions. Identification relies on recognizing the synergy of disproportionate moral claims, gradual value inversion, and functionally disruptive actions presented as virtue. Addressing requires deliberate shifts towards substantive engagement, humility, viewpoint diversity, and institutional emphasis on competence and evidence over signaling. In sum, the triad illuminates recurring patterns in the psychology of self-righteousness and the sociology of power within open societies. Its operation underscores the need for sustained attention to the alignment between moral claims and tangible outcomes. By cultivating practices that prioritize genuine dialogue, merit-based evaluation, and restraint in status-seeking, societies and individuals can mitigate the triad's corrosive effects while preserving the capacity for ethical reflection and collective advancement. This framework offers a structured lens for understanding and responding to dynamics that shape contemporary cultural and institutional landscapes.